And now I would like to hand over to Mr. Karoly Dan, the ambassador at the permanent mission of Hungary at the OSCE, the UN, and other international organizations in Vienna. Thank you very much.
Jó reggelt kívánok! Good morning. This has to be the curse of a diplomat. For once I have something interesting to say and the audience is still queuing at the entrance. But I will do my best to grab your attention. I'd like to also give you a little presentation of what we do at the OSCE and how it actually coincides with the work of the people and the teams who are competing here and the CERTs that are working on our security on a daily basis. The OSCE as an organization was conceived in the early 90s for conflict prevention. At that time, no one looked at cyber or computers as we do today. It wasn't part of our daily life. It wasn't so much in the kind of, the veins of our daily circulation. It was completely in a different reality. So most of the multilateral work that was kind of conceived at that time was primarily focusing on something as we call core security issues. This organization has 57 participating states, among them all the European countries, Russia, all the former Soviet republics, Canada, and the United States. The way it works, and this is why it becomes interesting, that we became a beacon in targeting cyber consultations and cooperation between states, is the reason because we work on a consensual basis, which means that we need to make a decision with the consent of all 57 countries. I'm trying to make this work somehow. And then, yes. A few years ago, though, certain participating states realized that ICT and cyber is becoming some sort of a new battlefield. And before that happens, the understanding was that regional organizations that have a smaller scope of countries have a better chance of developing something that would mutually reinforce understanding and trust when it comes to dealing with cyber issues. Let me immediately point out that we are not dealing with every aspect of what is going on in cyber. We're not dealing with cyber terrorism, cyber crimes. We're targeting something that is a very specific level of communication between states and policymakers and decision makers. We are not dealing with CERT-to-CERT communication. This kind of communication obviously has an effect and a really kind of a commanding way of dealing with how CERTs communicate with each other. But we're not targeting that area of communication, the CERT-to-CERT communication. We are dealing with state-to-state cooperation. For that to happen, participating states realized that they need to come up with confidence-building measures that were already applied in disarmament and also non-proliferation. On that model, about 5 years ago, we started to work on the first package of CBMs, or confidence-building measures, that would target certain areas of state-to-state cooperation. I will show you later on a little brief on how the 16 CBMs finally came together and how they are categorized at the moment. So the idea was to kind of be ahead of ourselves in a way and use this special format of 57 countries to conceive something that had no preceding procedure in other multilateral organizations. The other, and I believe the most important group, obviously, that was working on this was the group of governmental experts in the UN. But the UN framework, as we know, because it involves a lot more countries, can be difficult in a different way sometimes. We also noticed or witnessed last year that the last GG could not provide a final report, which means that there was no consensus, there was no understanding within the group that was formatted to deal with that matter. It doesn't mean that when you only have to deal with 57 countries, everything is always much easier. It is a smaller scope of countries, true. At the same time, there are polarizing interests, and consensus building makes life somewhat difficult in certain moments. Well, this is what we exactly are getting paid for, so that's it's not it's not a problem in any way. Going a little further in our work, we used a model and an understanding how to pave the way for our work to be done and how to create CBMs. And this is exactly how the UN process helped the way that the OSCE could move forward with this agenda. The OSCE, for the first, I would say, 20 years of its existence, was famous or infamous for two things. One was preventing conflicts, the other one was handling conflicts, the so-called frozen conflicts in the Caucasus, mostly, and Transnistria in Europe. The commitment to turn this expertise into something that is relevant in the field of cybersecurity was not a given at that time. We really had to convince our participating states as well that this organization can do a lot more for our security in the future. And that's how the understanding finally came about in developing this toolbox for risk reduction and conflict management. The way the OSCE works is that we have a so-called permanent council meeting every week, which is the political decision-making body of the organization, and we have a ministerial council every year. These are the two levels that can make decisions for the whole organizations. And we also have the Forum of Security Cooperation, which is dealing with the military aspects of the organization. I will not list all the decisions that were made and conceived in these bodies. I will just give you a very short outline of how these decisions led to the 16 CBMs that we have right now, and how the 16 CBMs more or less kind of cover the area of state-to-state cooperation when it comes to stability between states by promoting exchanges of information. But it has to be emphasized that this is a non-binding and voluntary set of measures. This is not in any way an enforced or reinforced way of communication between states. All that we do, all we want to do, is we do it because we feel it is important for the security of others and ourselves, and we believe that cooperation and communication is the only way to deal with these threats. Yet it doesn't make negotiations on these CBMs any easier. This is the layout of the 16 CBMs that were accepted in 2 different packages. And the informal working group is tasked now to further implement them and kind of give them the details and the necessary background so that we can deal with them as a already detailed set of rules of engagement, although voluntary rules of engagement for communication when it comes to cyber threats and cyber incidents. It's very difficult to deal with these issues because not even in international law, we have a great deal of reference to what we are dealing with. The legal background for this whole cooperation and communication is mostly absent at the moment. There is, however, a huge debate already on national sovereignty, self-defense, and the application of international law that I think is going to go on for a long time. Yet at the same time, with that backdrop, we'll have to move on with implementation, not only within the OSCE, but also in other fora as well. Posturing, communication, and preparedness would be these 3 easiest ways to categorize the confidence-building measures that we are working with. The most important part of this, and the first step for implementation, is to appoint national contact points, which means that if you have an incident, you know the number what to call to, you know the person who to call, and in every country there is only one person that is, even if you have more contact points, because your Minister of Defense might be connected, your Prime Minister's office might be connected, your Foreign Ministry might be, or Interior Ministry, it doesn't matter how many of them, but there has to be a hierarchy between them, and there has to be a leading contact point that is always receiving the signal. That contact point has to be in a position to alert policymakers, decision makers, and there has to be a mechanism how this information is digested and how the feedback is conceived, with ideally within the shortest time frame. That's number 1. And then all the rest follows. We tried a great deal to deal with CBM number 3, which you see in the second column, on consultations. Believe me, to have an understanding of what consultations mean is not that easy when it comes to multilateral forums, but we're working on that. The way forward with this whole set of CBMs is going to be, I believe, and this is something that I'm very convinced and that I am to blame for if I'm wrong, is to convince participating states that they should have ownership, or they should kind of get ownership for at least one CBM in this package. It doesn't mean that they have to do it alone. It is great and even better if they bring other countries on board and they do it together. For example, CBM number 3 was developed by the Swiss and the German delegation with a heavy involvement of their capital-based experts. If we have ownership, if we have a certain communication that is going on also in intercession periods, I think we have the critical mass of expertise, the critical mass of goodwill, and the critical mass of political will to move this agenda forward. So the big challenge for the coming year, 2018, is going to be how to establish this network of ownerships within participating states, and how to bring in their expertise and also their commitment to help our work and to move us forward, all of us. And if you look at the map, although we are only talking about 57 countries, these 57 countries cover a great deal of the populated Earth and also of the world GDP. So it is a very unique set of countries in that respect. Last week, I was in Tokyo on the invitation of the Asian Regional Forum. The Japanese Foreign Ministry organized the first study group meeting to develop CBMs for their region. I was absolutely astonished to see how much they have taken the work that we did in the OSCE as an example. And because they have, it's a kind of a more loose regional forum, not as determined as ours within the OSCE, they also have a much easier way of moving forward with implementation. So my hope is that we are truly going to influence each other in a way that we did a groundbreaking work on developing CBMs. They will help us with very good examples and ways of implementation. Chiseling out the details for all these CBMs so they become workable agreements between countries that need to communicate in times of crisis and incidents. In this conference, one of the, to me, the most interesting part is the third competition. That is, I believe, in this year is going to take place between 5 or 6 or 7 countries. And I hope that within the OSCE we can convince more participating states to send their teams for the next year's conference. I would also like to bring our capital-based working group to see what is going on at this conference, because I think it is a unique opportunity to involve policymakers, decision makers, diplomats, and most importantly, the people who actually work on combating threats when they occur. And for that respect, I am absolutely indebted to the organizers for having invited me and giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you so much for your attention.